Harold Martinez pushed his cleaning cart down the shiny marble floors of Westfield Shopping Center, just like he had done every morning for the past 12 years. At 78 years old, his back ached more than it used to, and his hands weren't as steady as they once were. But Harold never complained. He took pride in keeping the mall spotless, arriving at 5 in the morning before any stores opened their doors. The other workers knew Harold as a quiet man who kept to himself. He wore the same faded blue uniform every day, his name tag slightly crooked on his chest. Most shoppers walked past him without a second glance, treating him like he was invisible. Harold didn't mind. He found peace in his routine work, mopping floors, emptying trash bins, and cleaning the food court tables. What nobody knew about Harold was his past. 50 years ago, he had been Agent Martinez, one of the FBI's most skilled undercover operatives. He had spent decades infiltrating criminal organizations, gathering intelligence that led to hundreds of arrests. His work had been so secretive that even after retirement, his records remained classified. Harold had chosen to disappear into a simple life, wanting nothing more than quiet days after years of danger. That Tuesday morning started like any other. Harold unlocked the supply closet and filled his cart with cleaning supplies. The mall wouldn't open to shoppers for another 4 hours, but Harold liked having everything ready. He started his rounds on the upper level, working his way through the corridors that connected the anchor stores. As he cleaned near the jewelry store, Harold noticed something unusual. 3 young men in expensive clothes were walking through the mall, even though it was closed to the public. They moved with confidence as if they belonged there. Harold had learned long ago to trust his instincts, and something felt wrong about these visitors. The men stopped near the high-end electronics store, talking in low voices. Harold continued his work nearby, his trained ears picking up fragments of their conversation. They mentioned Thursday night, security codes, and getting inside after hours. Harold's old instincts kicked in. These weren't early shoppers or maintenance workers. They were planning something. One of the men, tall with slicked-back hair, noticed Harold watching. He walked over with a smirk on his face. "Hey, old man, you got nothing better to do than stare at us?" The man's voice was loud and mocking. His 2 friends laughed and joined him, surrounding Harold's cleaning cart. "Just doing my job, son," Harold said quietly, continuing to mop the floor. He kept his head down, playing the part of a harmless old janitor. Inside, his mind was racing, cataloging every detail about the 3 men. The tall one had a scar on his left hand. The second man wore a college ring from a university Harold recognized. The third kept checking his phone nervously. "Your job?" The tall man laughed cruelly. "Your job is to clean up after your betters, Grandpa. Maybe you should learn to mind your own business." He kicked Harold's mop bucket, sending soapy water across the floor. His friends found this hilarious, their laughter echoing through the empty mall. Harold bent down slowly to clean up the spilled water. "Sorry about that," he said, his voice remaining calm. The men continued their insults, calling him worthless and making jokes about his age. Other early workers were starting to arrive, but they hurried past, not wanting to get involved. "Look at this old fool," the second man said, pointing at Harold's uniform. "Probably been doing this dead-end job his whole life. What a waste." They knocked over his trash bags and scattered cleaning supplies across the floor. Harold picked everything up without a word, his face showing no emotion. The 3 men eventually grew bored with their cruel game and walked away, still laughing. Harold watched them leave through the mall's main entrance. Once they were gone, he quickly made his way to the security office. The guard on duty, Marcus, was someone Harold had known for years. "Marcus, I need to ask you something," Harold said, his voice serious. "Those 3 men who just left, do you know who they are?" "They seem to know their way around the mall pretty well." Marcus checked his logbook. "They said they were from the corporate office doing some kind of inspection. Had proper ID and everything. Why? Did they give you trouble, Harold?" "I saw them laughing about something." Harold shook his head. "Just curious." "Thanks, Marcus." He left the security office with more questions than answers. Corporate inspectors didn't usually come at 5 in the morning, and they certainly didn't talk about security codes and getting inside after hours. For the rest of the morning, Harold couldn't shake the feeling that something big was being planned. He remembered cases from his FBI days where criminals would spend weeks studying their targets, learning schedules and security procedures. The jewelry store and electronics store they had been near contained millions of dollars worth of merchandise. During his lunch break, Harold sat in the back room and thought carefully about what he had overheard. Thursday night was only 2 days away. The mall closed at 9 on weekdays, and security made their rounds every hour after that. If someone wanted to break in, they would need inside information about the alarm systems and guard schedules. Harold had 2 choices. He could report what he had seen to mall security and let them handle it. Or he could investigate further, using skills he hadn't used in decades. Part of him wanted to stay out of it, to remain the invisible janitor that nobody suspected of anything more than pushing a mop. But another part of him, the part that had spent 30 years fighting crime, couldn't ignore what he had witnessed. These criminals had humiliated him, treated him like garbage. They thought he was just a harmless old man who wouldn't cause them any problems. They had no idea who they were dealing with. As Harold returned to work that afternoon, he made his decision. He would watch and gather information, just like in the old days. If his suspicions were correct, he would make sure these arrogant criminals got exactly what they deserved. They had picked the wrong janitor to mess with. The mall filled with shoppers as the day progressed, but Harold's mind was elsewhere. He was already planning how to investigate the 3 men further, using methods he hadn't employed in 20 years. His quiet retirement was about to become very interesting indeed. That evening, Harold Martinez sat in his small apartment staring at a notebook he hadn't opened in 20 years. Inside were contact numbers for people he used to work with at the FBI, most of whom probably thought he was dead or completely retired from anything exciting. Harold opened the notebook carefully, running his finger down the list of names. He found what he was looking for: Agent Sarah Chen, who had been his partner during his last few years at the Bureau. Sarah was now a senior agent in the Organized Crime Division. If anyone could help him figure out who those 3 men were, it would be her. Harold picked up his old flip phone and dialed the number. After several rings, a familiar voice answered. Chen speaking. "Sarah, it's Harold Martinez. I know it's been a long time." There was silence on the other end, then Sarah's voice filled with surprise. "Harold, my God, we thought you had disappeared completely. Where are you? Are you okay?" "I'm fine, Sarah. I've been working as a janitor at a shopping mall in California. Listen, I need a favor. Can you run some names through the database for me? I think I might have stumbled onto something big." Harold described the 3 men in detail, giving Sarah every piece of information he had gathered. The scar on the tall man's hand, the college ring, the way they moved and talked. Sarah listened carefully, taking notes just like she used to during their investigations. "Harold, this sounds serious. Are you sure about what you heard? Security codes and inside jobs aren't something to take lightly." "I'm sure, Sarah, these aren't just petty thieves. They're planning something sophisticated for Thursday night. The mall they're targeting has several high-value stores, including a jewelry store that keeps expensive pieces on display." Sarah promised to run the information through the FBI database and get back to him within a few hours. Harold spent the rest of the evening preparing, just like he used to before major operations. He dug through his closet and found an old camera with a telephoto lens, equipment he had kept from his surveillance days. The next morning, Wednesday, Harold arrived at work earlier than usual. He wanted to be in position if the 3 men returned to scout their target again. Criminal organizations often made multiple visits before executing their plans, checking for changes in security routines or unexpected obstacles. Harold positioned himself near the jewelry store, pretending to clean the same section of floor over and over again. His patience paid off around 10 in the morning when the 3 men returned. This time they brought a 4th person with them, a woman with short red hair wearing a business suit. The woman carried a briefcase and seemed to be in charge of the operation. She walked directly to the jewelry store and spent several minutes studying the display cases and security cameras. Harold watched from behind a pillar, using his old training to remain invisible while gathering intelligence. The 4 criminals split up and walked to different parts of the mall. Harold realized they were studying the entire layout, not just one store. The woman went to the electronics store, the tall man checked out the exit routes, and the other 2 positioned themselves near the security office to watch the guards' routines. Harold's phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. The message was short, but alarming. "Found matches. All 3 connected to the Castellano family. Very dangerous. Call me immediately." Harold quickly made his way to a quiet corner and called Sarah back. "What did you find?" "Harold, these men work for Vincent Castellano, one of the most powerful crime bosses on the West Coast. The tall one is Marcus Castellano, Vincent's nephew. The other two are experienced thieves with records going back 15 years. If they're planning a job at your mall, it's not just about stealing jewelry. This could be part of a much larger operation. Harold felt his old excitement returning. This was bigger than he had imagined. Sarah, I need backup. They're planning to hit the mall tomorrow night. I can't handle this alone. I'm already putting together a team. We've been trying to get evidence against the Castellanos for years. This could be our chance. But Harold, you need to be extremely careful. These people won't hesitate to kill anyone who gets in their way. After hanging up, Harold returned to his surveillance position. The four criminals were now meeting near the food court, comparing notes and making plans. Harold managed to get close enough to hear more of their conversation. The woman, who seemed to be the mastermind, was explaining the timeline. Security changes shifts at midnight. That gives us a 3-minute window when the new guard checks the upper level. Marcus, you handle the electronics store. Tommy and Jake will take the jewelry store. I'll coordinate from the van outside. Harold memorized every detail of their plan. They had inside information about the security schedule, which meant someone working at the mall was helping them. This was exactly the kind of information the FBI would need to make arrests that would stick in court. The criminals finished their meeting and left the mall, but not before Marcus Castellano spotted Harold again. This time, instead of mocking him, Marcus studied Harold carefully. Harold pretended to be struggling with a heavy trash bag, playing up his age and weakness. "Hey, old man," Marcus called out. "You're here a lot, aren't you? Always cleaning, always watching." Harold looked up with what he hoped was a confused expression. "Just doing my job, son. Been working here 12 years. These floors don't clean themselves." Marcus stared at Harold for a long moment, then shrugged and walked away. But Harold noticed that Marcus had taken a photo of him with his phone. That wasn't good. If the Castellanos suspected that Harold was more than just a janitor, his cover would be blown. Harold spent the rest of the day creating a detailed map of the mall and marking all the locations where he had seen the criminals. He noted their escape routes, their target stores, and the timing of their planned operation. By evening, he had put together a complete intelligence package that would impress his old colleagues at the FBI. That night, Harold couldn't sleep. Tomorrow would be Thursday, the night of the robbery. Sarah had promised that a team of agents would be in position, but Harold knew how quickly things could go wrong in operations like this. He had seen good agents get killed because of bad timing or unexpected complications. Harold made himself some coffee and sat at his kitchen table, looking at old photos from his FBI days. He had forgotten how much he missed the excitement of real investigative work. For 20 years he had been content to remain invisible. But tomorrow night he would step back into the world he had left behind. As dawn approached, Harold prepared for what might be the most important day of his retirement. He had no idea that by tomorrow night, the entire mall would be surrounded by FBI agents, and his quiet life as a janitor would be changed forever. Thursday morning arrived with Harold Martinez feeling more alert than he had in years. As he put on his janitor uniform, he checked the small recording device that Agent Sarah Chen had arranged to have delivered to his apartment during the night. The device was no bigger than a quarter and could capture conversations from 30 feet away. Harold arrived at the mall at his usual time, but today everything felt different. He knew that somewhere in the area, FBI agents were taking positions for the evening operation. Sarah had told him that a full surveillance team would be watching the mall from multiple angles, ready to move in once the criminals made their move. The day passed slowly as Harold went through his normal cleaning routine. He paid extra attention to the areas around the jewelry store and electronics store, making sure he knew every entrance and exit. He also watched the security guards carefully, trying to identify which one might be working with the Castellano family. Around noon, Harold noticed something that made his blood run cold. Marcus Castellano was back in the mall, but this time he wasn't scouting. He was talking quietly with David Peterson, one of the security guards Harold had worked alongside for 5 years. Harold watched from a distance as David nodded and shook hands with Marcus before walking away quickly. Harold immediately called Sarah from the bathroom, speaking in whispers. "The inside man is David Peterson, one of the security guards. I just saw him meeting with Marcus Castellano. They're definitely planning to use him tonight. Good work, Harold. We suspected there was inside help, but we needed confirmation." Our team is already in position around the mall. Are you sure you want to go through with this? Once things start tonight, there's no going back. Harold thought about the question seriously. He could walk away right now, let the FBI handle everything and go back to his quiet life. But the memory of being humiliated by these criminals still burned in his mind. They had treated him like garbage, assuming he was just a helpless old man. They were about to learn how wrong they were. I'm staying, Sarah. These people need to be stopped. And I'm the only one who can get close enough to record their conversations during the robbery. The afternoon dragged on as Harold continued his work, all while keeping an eye on David Peterson's movements. The corrupt security guard was acting nervous, checking his watch frequently and making unnecessary trips to different parts of the mall. Harold could tell that David was having second thoughts about helping criminals. But it was too late for him to back out now. As closing time approached, Harold positioned himself in the supply closet nearest to the jewelry store. Sarah had explained that the FBI team would wait until the criminals actually began stealing before moving in. They needed solid evidence of the crime in progress to ensure the arrests would lead to convictions. At 9 o'clock, the mall officially closed to shoppers. Harold heard the familiar sounds of store employees leaving and security guards beginning their evening rounds. Everything seemed normal on the surface, but Harold knew that in just 3 hours, this quiet shopping center would become the scene of a major FBI operation. Harold used the waiting time to test his recording equipment and review the layout of the mall one more time. He had identified 3 different positions where he could observe the robbery without being seen. The key would be getting close enough to record the criminals' conversations while staying hidden from view. At 11:45 p.m., Harold heard voices echoing through the empty mall corridors. The criminals had arrived 15 minutes early, probably to make sure everything was ready for their midnight operation. Harold crept out of the supply closet and made his way toward the jewelry store, moving as quietly as his old training had taught him. He could see 4 figures near the store's entrance. The red-haired woman was giving final instructions to the 3 men, just as Harold had observed during their planning meeting. Harold activated his recording device and moved closer, hiding behind a large decorative plant that gave him a clear view of the criminals. Remember, we have exactly 12 minutes before the next security round, the woman was saying. Marcus, you take the electronics. Tommy and Jake, focus on the high-end jewelry cases. David has disabled the alarms on both stores, but we still need to move fast. Harold smiled grimly as his device captured every word. This was exactly the kind of evidence the FBI needed to prove conspiracy and inside collaboration. He watched as the criminals used sophisticated tools to open the store's security gate, confirming that this was no amateur operation. Marcus Castellano walked toward the electronics store, while the other 2 men began working on the jewelry store's locks. Harold followed Marcus, staying in the shadows and recording everything. Marcus moved with confidence, obviously familiar with the store's layout and security systems. Harold positioned himself behind a maintenance cart about 20 feet from the electronics store entrance. From this position, he could see Marcus filling large bags with expensive phones, tablets, and computer equipment. The criminal worked methodically, selecting only the most valuable items and ignoring cheaper merchandise. Through his earpiece, Harold could hear Sarah's voice providing updates on the FBI team's position. Harold, we have eyes on the van outside. The woman is coordinating from there just like you predicted. We also have agents positioned at all the exits. When you give us the signal, we'll move in. Harold watched as Marcus loaded his bags with stolen electronics. The young criminal was completely focused on his work, never suspecting that he was being recorded by the same janitor he had mocked just 2 days earlier. Harold felt a deep satisfaction knowing that Marcus's arrogance was about to cost him his freedom. Suddenly, Harold heard footsteps approaching his hiding spot. He looked up to see David Peterson walking directly toward him, flashlight in hand. The corrupt security guard had spotted Harold's position and was coming to investigate. "Hey, who's there?" David called out, his voice shaky with nervousness. The mall is supposed to be empty. Harold realized he had to make a quick decision. If David discovered him and raised an alarm, the entire operation could be compromised. The FBI team wasn't ready to move yet, and the criminals might escape if they were warned too early. Harold stepped out from behind the maintenance cart, playing his role as the harmless old janitor. "Sorry, David, I was just finishing up some cleaning. Left my supplies here earlier." David stared at Harold suspiciously. "Harold, what are you doing here this late? You're supposed to be gone by 8 o'clock. Had some extra work to catch up on. You know how it is." Harold kept his voice calm and casual even though his heart was racing. He could see Marcus Castellano in the distance, still loading stolen merchandise and unaware of the conversation taking place nearby. David looked nervous and confused. Harold realized that the young security guard was probably having serious doubts about his involvement with the criminals. This might be Harold's chance to turn the situation to his advantage. "David, son, you look worried about something. Everything okay?" Harold asked, his voice filled with grandfatherly concern. David hesitated for a long moment, then looked around to make sure no one else could hear them. "Harold, you need to get out of here right now. There's going to be trouble tonight, and I don't want you to get hurt." Harold nodded slowly as if he understood, but instead of leaving, he was preparing for the most dangerous part of his mission. In just a few minutes, he would give the FBI the signal to begin their raid, and this quiet mall would explode into action. The mall's alarm system shrieked through the corridors as Marcus Castellano held his gun on Harold Martinez. The flashing emergency lights cast wild shadows across the walls, creating a chaotic atmosphere that made the standoff even more dangerous. Harold could hear his earpiece crackling with activity as Agent Sarah Chen coordinated the FBI response to the unexpected alarm activation. All units, we have premature alarm activation." Sarah's voice came through clearly. "Suspects may attempt immediate evacuation. Move to intercept positions now." Marcus was shouting into his radio, trying to coordinate with his partners at the jewelry store. "Tommy, forget the merchandise. Get to the van now. We've got problems here." The response from the jewelry store was filled with panic. "Marcus, the place is lit up like Christmas. Every alarm in the building is going off. Something's wrong with David's information." Harold realized this was his moment to act. With Marcus distracted by the radio communications, Harold dove behind a nearby bench just as the sound of shattering glass echoed from the mall's main entrance. The FBI tactical team was making their entry, exactly as planned. David Peterson stood frozen in terror as federal agents poured into the mall from multiple entrances. The young security guard had never imagined he would find himself in the middle of a major FBI raid. Harold could see David calculating whether to run or surrender, his whole body shaking with fear. Marcus spun around as the sounds of combat boots echoed through the mall corridors. "This is a setup. David, you betrayed us." He raised his gun toward the terrified security guard, but Harold was already moving. Years of FBI training kicked in as Harold launched himself at Marcus, even though he was nearly 80 years old. The tackle sent both men crashing into a decorative planter, with Marcus's gun flying across the marble floor. Harold might have been old, but he was still tough enough to handle one surprise criminal. Federal agents, everyone on the ground now. The shouts came from multiple directions as FBI tactical teams swept through the mall. Harold could see agents with assault rifles and bulletproof vests moving in coordinated formations, sealing off every possible escape route. Marcus struggled to break free from Harold's grip, but the old agent held on with surprising strength. "You think you're so smart, old man? My Uncle Vincent has judges and prosecutors on his payroll. I'll be out of prison before you're cold in the ground." Harold tightened his hold on Marcus. "Maybe so, son. But today you're going to jail, and that's enough justice for me." David Peterson suddenly broke from his paralysis and ran toward the approaching FBI agents, his hands raised high in surrender. "Don't shoot." "I'm David Peterson, the security guard." "I want to cooperate." "I have information about the Castellano family." Agent Sarah Chen appeared around the corner, leading a team of agents toward Harold's position. Sarah was exactly as Harold remembered her, calm under pressure and completely in control of the situation. She quickly assessed the scene and directed 2 agents to secure Marcus while others checked on Harold. "Harold, are you hurt?" Sarah asked, helping him to his feet. "That was incredibly dangerous. You should have waited for backup." Harold brushed off his uniform and retrieved his recording device, which had continued running throughout the entire confrontation. "I'm fine, Sarah, and we got everything on tape." Marcus admitted to the robbery, mentioned his Uncle Vincent by name, and threatened a federal agent. This recording will be solid evidence in court. Meanwhile, the other FBI teams were dealing with the criminals at the jewelry store. Harold could hear shouting and the sound of handcuffs clicking as Tommy and Jake were arrested trying to escape through a service corridor. The red-haired woman who had been coordinating from the van outside was also in custody, caught as she tried to drive away from the mall parking lot. As the immediate danger passed, Harold looked around at the scene with mixed emotions. The mall where he had worked peacefully for 12 years was now full of federal agents, evidence technicians, and crime scene photographers. His quiet life as an invisible janitor was definitely over. David Peterson was talking rapidly to FBI agents, providing details about how the Castellano family had recruited him and threatened his girlfriend to ensure his cooperation. Harold could see that David was genuinely remorseful and terrified. Probably a good candidate for witness protection if his information proved valuable. Marcus Castellano, now handcuffed and surrounded by agents, glared at Harold with pure hatred. "This isn't over, Martinez. My family has long memories and longer reach. You should have stayed retired and minded your own business." Harold walked over to Marcus and looked him in the eyes. "Son, I've been dealing with criminals like you and your family for 30 years. Your threats don't scare me, but I'll tell you what should scare you. Spending the next 20 years in federal prison thinking about how you got outsmarted by a 78-year-old janitor." Agent Sarah Chen was coordinating with the crime scene team, making sure all evidence was properly documented and secured. The stolen merchandise from both stores was being photographed and cataloged, providing clear proof of the robbery charges. The recording device Harold had worn captured hours of incriminating conversations that would be devastating in court. "Harold, we're going to need you to come to the field office for a full debriefing," Sarah explained. "Your testimony will be crucial for the prosecution. This case could finally give us the evidence we need to go after the entire Castellano organization." Harold nodded, understanding that his involvement was far from over. What about David? He was scared and made some bad choices, but he's not a career criminal like these others. Sarah glanced at David Peterson, who was still talking to agents near the jewelry store. "His cooperation will be noted in our reports. If he provides useful information about the Castellano family's operations, the prosecutors might be willing to work out a deal." As the FBI teams finished securing the scene, Harold realized that his quiet retirement was definitely coming to an end. Word would spread through law enforcement circles that Agent Harold Martinez was back in action, even if only temporarily. The mall's management arrived shortly after the arrests, shocked to discover that their quiet janitor was actually a retired FBI agent who had just helped break up a major robbery. Harold could see the confusion and amazement on their faces as they watched him discussing case details with federal agents like he had done it his entire life. "Harold," Sarah said as the crime scene teams finished their work, "I have to ask, do you miss this? The investigations, the danger, the feeling of making a real difference?" Harold looked around at the controlled chaos of the FBI operation, then at his cleaning cart still sitting abandoned near the jewelry store. "I thought I was done with all this, Sarah. 20 years of mopping floors and emptying trash cans seemed like enough excitement for an old man. But seeing those criminals mock me, treating me like I was worthless, it reminded me why I became an agent in the first place." The last of the evidence was being loaded into FBI vehicles as the mall slowly returned to an eerie quiet. Harold knew that by morning, news crews would be all over the story. The image of a 78-year-old janitor helping to catch dangerous criminals would be irresistible to the media. Marcus Castellano was led past Harold in handcuffs, still defiant, despite his arrest. "Enjoy your moment, old man. My lawyer will have me out on bail by tomorrow. And my Uncle Vincent doesn't forget people who cross our family." Harold watched as Marcus was loaded into the FBI transport vehicle. "We'll see about that, son. Federal judges take a dim view of organized crime these days, especially when it involves threatening retired federal agents." As the tactical teams cleared out and the mall returned to darkness, Harold found himself alone with Sarah in the corridor where it all began. The place looked exactly the same as it had that morning, but Harold knew that everything had changed forever. "What happens now?" Harold asked. "I suppose I should start looking for a new job. Something tells me the mall management might not want a janitor who attracts federal raids." Sarah laughed, the first moment of lightness in a very intense evening. "Harold, I have a feeling you won't have trouble finding work. The Bureau has been talking about bringing back experienced agents as consultants. With your background and what you accomplished here tonight, you could write your own ticket." Harold picked up his mop and began cleaning up the water that had spilled from his bucket during the confrontation with Marcus. Even after everything that had happened, his instincts as a janitor kicked in automatically. But as he worked, he was already thinking about what Sarah had said about consulting work. The truth was, Harold had felt more alive in the past few hours than he had in 20 years. The mental challenge of gathering intelligence, the satisfaction of outmaneuvering dangerous criminals, the knowledge that his actions had prevented serious crimes, all of it reminded him why he had loved being an FBI agent. As dawn approached and the mall prepared to open for another day of normal business, Harold Martinez stood in the corridor where 3 arrogant criminals had mocked him just 2 days earlier. They had seen only a harmless old janitor and had made the biggest mistake of their criminal careers. Harold smiled as he thought about Marcus Castellano sitting in a federal holding cell. Probably. Harold looked directly at David Peterson, seeing the fear and guilt written across the young man's face. David was barely 25 years old, probably desperate for money and in over his head with dangerous criminals. Harold decided to take a calculated risk that could either save the operation or destroy it completely. "David, I know what's happening here tonight," Harold said quietly. "I know about the robbery, about your involvement with these people. But it's not too late to do the right thing." David's eyes went wide with panic. "Harold, you don't understand. These people will kill me if I don't help them. They know where I live, where my girlfriend works. I didn't have a choice." Harold stepped closer, keeping his voice low and calm. "Son, there's always a choice. And right now you can choose to help stop this instead of being part of it. The FBI is already here, surrounding the building. In a few minutes, this place is going to be crawling with federal agents." David stared at Harold in disbelief. "FBI? How do you know about the FBI? You're just a janitor." Harold smiled slightly. "I used to be Agent Harold Martinez, FBI Organized Crime Division. I've been retired for 20 years, but I still recognize a Castellano family operation when I see one." The revelation hit David like a physical blow. He stumbled backward, his flashlight clattering to the floor. "You're a federal agent? But you've been cleaning floors here for years." "I don't understand." "I was deep undercover for most of my career, David. Staying invisible became a habit even after retirement. But when I saw those criminals planning to rob this mall, I had to act." Harold could hear voices from the jewelry store growing louder. The robbery was proceeding according to the criminals' timeline. David looked around frantically as if expecting FBI agents to appear from every direction. "What's going to happen to me? I helped them plan this. I disabled the alarms. I'm going to prison." Harold put a reassuring hand on the young man's shoulder. "That depends on what you do in the next 5 minutes, David. You can run and try to escape with the criminals, or you can help us catch them. Cooperation goes a long way with federal prosecutors." Meanwhile, Marcus Castellano had finished loading his bags with stolen electronics and was heading back toward the jewelry store to check on his partners. Harold realized they were running out of time. The criminals would complete their robbery soon and attempt to escape. "David, I need you to call your FBI contact right now and tell them you're ready to cooperate," Harold said urgently. "Give them the van's license plate number, the escape route, everything you know about tonight's operation." But David was paralyzed with fear. "I can't. You don't know these people, Harold. The Castellanos don't forgive betrayal. They'll hunt me down no matter where I go." Harold grabbed David by the shoulders and looked him straight in the eyes. "Listen to me carefully. The FBI has been trying to get evidence against the Castellano family for years. Your cooperation could help put Vincent Castellano and his entire organization away for decades. The Witness Protection Program exists for exactly this kind of situation." Before David could respond, they heard Marcus Castellano's voice calling out from across the mall. "Hey, what's going on over there?" "David, is that you?" Harold quickly pushed David behind a pillar and stepped into view, resuming his role as the harmless janitor. "Just me, son. Sorry if I startled anyone. Was finishing up some late cleaning." Marcus walked toward them, his expression suspicious. "I thought David said this place would be empty." "What are you doing here, old man?" "Like I told your friend here, just catching up on some work. These floors don't clean themselves." Harold kept his voice steady, but he could feel the tension building. Marcus was no longer treating him like a harmless joke. "You know what? I think you're lying." Marcus reached into his jacket and Harold saw the handle of a gun. "I think you've been watching us, asking too many questions. Maybe taking pictures." Harold raised his hands peacefully. "I don't want any trouble, son. I'm just trying to do my job and get home to my wife." The lie about having a wife came naturally, part of maintaining his cover story. Marcus pulled out his phone and showed Harold a photo. It was the picture Marcus had taken of Harold 2 days earlier. I ran this through some facial recognition software. Very interesting results, Agent Martinez. Harold's blood ran cold. His cover was blown completely. Marcus had discovered his real identity, which meant the entire operation was compromised. Harold could hear Sarah's voice in his earpiece asking for a status update, but he couldn't respond without revealing the communication device. That's right. We know exactly who you are, Marcus continued, his gun now visible but not quite pointed at Harold. 30 years with the FBI, specialized in organized crime. Quite an impressive record, Agent Martinez. Or should I call you Harold the Janitor? David Peterson emerged from behind the pillar, his face pale with terror. Marcus, please. He's just an old man. He doesn't know anything. Marcus laughed coldly. David, you're even dumber than I thought. This old man is probably wearing a wire right now, recording everything we say. The FBI is probably listening to us at this very moment. Harold realized that the situation had spiraled completely out of control. Marcus was smart enough to figure out that this was a setup, which meant the other criminals would be alerted soon. The FBI raid would have to happen immediately, before the criminals could escape or destroy evidence. Harold made a split-second decision that would determine the success or failure of the entire operation. Instead of continuing to play the helpless janitor, he dropped the act completely and became Agent Martinez once again. You're right, Marcus. I am recording this conversation, and the FBI has been watching your family's activities for months. But here's what you don't know. This mall is completely surrounded. There's no escape route that we haven't anticipated. Marcus raised his gun and pointed it directly at Harold. Maybe not, but I can still make sure you don't live to testify against us. Harold didn't flinch. After 30 years of facing dangerous criminals, he had learned not to show fear even when death was seconds away. Go ahead and shoot, Marcus. But the moment you pull that trigger, 20 federal agents are going to storm through those doors. Is killing a retired agent really worth spending the rest of your life in federal prison? The standoff continued for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds. Harold could see Marcus weighing his options, trying to decide whether to cut his losses and run or eliminate the witness who could destroy his family's criminal empire. In the distance, Harold heard the sound of breaking glass. The other criminals at the jewelry store had triggered some kind of alarm, probably by accident. Within seconds, the mall's emergency lights began flashing, and a loud siren started wailing throughout the building. Marcus cursed and grabbed his radio. Tommy, Jake, what's happening over there? The response came back full of panic. The alarms are going off. David said he disabled them, but something went wrong. We need to get out of here now. Harold smiled grimly. The operation was about to reach its climax and everything would be decided in the next few minutes. Still trying to figure out how he had been outsmarted by a man with a mop and bucket, sometimes the most dangerous enemies were the ones you never saw coming. By 8 o'clock the next morning, Harold Martinez's quiet life had exploded into a media circus. News vans surrounded the mall parking lot and reporters were already calling him the hero janitor and America's most unlikely FBI agent. Harold sat in Agent Sarah Chen's field office, watching the coverage on television with a mixture of amusement and concern. This is Channel 7 News with breaking coverage of last night's dramatic FBI raid at Westfield Shopping Center, the reporter announced. What appeared to be a routine robbery attempt turned into something much more when a 78-year-old janitor revealed himself to be a retired federal agent who had been gathering evidence against the criminals for days. Harold shook his head as he watched footage of himself being interviewed by other reporters outside the mall. I never wanted this kind of attention, Sarah. All I wanted was to stop some criminals from robbing the place where I worked. Sarah was reviewing the evidence they had collected, including hours of recorded conversations and testimony from David Peterson. Harold, this case is going to be huge. We've got enough evidence to charge not just the 4 people we arrested, but potentially a dozen other members of the Castellano crime family. David's information is leading us to bank records, safe houses, and other operations we never knew existed. The phone in Sarah's office rang constantly as other FBI field offices called for information about the case. Harold's name was being mentioned in law enforcement circles across the country as agents remembered his legendary undercover work from decades earlier. Many young agents had heard stories about Harold Martinez but thought he was dead or completely retired. "Agent Chen, we have a problem," another agent said as he entered the office. "Vincent Castellanos' lawyer is already filing motions claiming his nephew was entrapped by a federal agent working undercover without proper authorization. They're saying the whole operation was illegal." Harold stood up angrily. "That's ridiculous. I haven't been a federal agent for 20 years. I was working as a janitor and happened to observe criminal activity. Any citizen has the right to report crimes to law enforcement." Sarah nodded in agreement. Harold's right. He was acting as a private citizen when he first observed the criminals. His decision to contact the FBI and cooperate with our investigation was completely legal. Vincent Castellanos' lawyers are grasping at straws. The television coverage continued throughout the morning, with reporters interviewing Harold's co-workers at the mall and neighbors from his apartment building. Everyone seemed shocked to learn that the quiet janitor they had, known for years, was actually a decorated federal agent with an incredible career fighting organized crime. "I always knew there was something different about Harold," said Marcus, the security guard Harold had worked with for years. "He was too observant, too calm under pressure. But I never imagined he was FBI. He was just a really good janitor who kept to himself." Harold's apartment building was surrounded by reporters trying to get interviews with neighbors and building managers. Harold realized he would never be able to return to his old life even if he wanted to. His cover as an invisible retiree was completely blown. Around noon, Harold received a phone call that surprised him. It was David Peterson, calling from the FBI safe house where he was being protected while providing information about the Castellano family's operations. "Mr. Martinez, Agent Martinez, I wanted to thank you," David said, his voice much calmer than it had been during the robbery. "If you hadn't given me the chance to cooperate, I would probably be sitting in jail right now facing 20 years in prison." Harold was moved by the young man's gratitude. "David, you made the right choice when it mattered most." "That takes courage, especially when you're dealing with dangerous people like the Castellanos. The FBI agents here tell me that my information is helping them build cases against a lot of bad people. I know I messed up by getting involved with criminals in the first place, but at least now I can help fix some of the damage I caused." After hanging up with David, Harold felt a sense of satisfaction that went beyond just catching the criminals who had mocked him. David Peterson was a young man who had made some terrible mistakes, but was now trying to make things right. Harold had helped give him that opportunity for redemption. Agent Sarah Chen returned to her office with news that made Harold smile. "Harold, I just got word from the prosecutor's office. Marcus Castellano has been denied bail. The judge ruled that he poses a flight risk and a danger to witnesses. He'll be staying in federal custody until trial." Harold nodded with satisfaction. "What about the others?" "Tommy and Jake are also being held without bail. The woman, whose real name is Lisa Moretti, is Vincent Castellanos' accountant and money launderer. She's agreed to cooperate in exchange for a reduced sentence. Between her financial records and David's inside information, we're building a case that could shut down the entire Castellano operation." The afternoon brought more reporters and more requests for interviews. Harold was politely declining most of them, but he agreed to speak with a journalist from the local newspaper who had covered crime in the area for 20 years. "Agent Martinez, what made you decide to come out of retirement to help with this case?" the reporter asked. Harold thought carefully before answering. "I didn't plan to come out of retirement. I was happy being a janitor, living quietly and bothering no one. But when I saw those criminals planning to hurt innocent people and damage a place where I had worked for 12 years, I couldn't just ignore it. Some things are more important than staying comfortable." "What was it like being underestimated by the criminals because of your age and job?" Harold smiled slightly. "It was actually an advantage. They saw an old man with a mop and assumed I was harmless. That assumption cost them their freedom. In my experience, the most dangerous people are often the ones you never suspect." As evening approached, Harold realized that his life had changed completely in just 24 hours. The quiet apartment where he had lived peacefully for 2 decades was no longer safe from media attention. The job he had done faithfully for 12 years was no longer possible now that everyone knew his real identity. But instead of feeling sad about losing his quiet retirement, Harold felt energized by the possibility of returning to meaningful work. Agent Sarah Chen had already mentioned consulting opportunities with the FBI, and other law enforcement agencies were calling to ask about his availability for training programs and special investigations. That night, Harold sat in a hotel room provided by the FBI for his protection, watching the evening news coverage of his story. The reporters were calling him a hero and inspiration, and proof that you're never too old to make a difference. Harold found the attention embarrassing but also deeply satisfying. He thought about Marcus Castellanos sitting in a federal jail cell, probably still unable to believe that he had been outsmarted by a 78-year-old janitor. Harold had spent 20 years trying to be invisible, but sometimes the most important thing you can do is step out of the shadows and fight for what's right. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as the Castellano case moved forward, and Harold decided what to do with the rest of his life. But tonight he was content knowing that justice had been served and dangerous criminals were behind bars where they belonged. 6 months after the FBI raid at Westfield Shopping Center, Harold Martinez stood in a federal courtroom watching Marcus Castellano receive a 25-year prison sentence for robbery, conspiracy, and threatening a federal agent. The young criminal who had once mocked Harold as a worthless old janitor now avoided eye contact as the judge delivered the verdict that would keep him behind bars until he was middle-aged. Harold had testified for 3 days during the trial, describing in detail how he had observed the criminals planning their robbery and gathering evidence for the FBI. The recording device he had worn captured everything, and the jury had no trouble understanding that this was a sophisticated criminal operation, not a simple robbery gone wrong. Vincent Castellano, Marcus's uncle and the head of the crime family, received a life sentence based largely on information provided by David Peterson and Lisa Moretti. The financial records Lisa had maintained as the family's accountant revealed decades of money laundering, illegal gambling, and other criminal activities. Harold's investigation had led to the dismantling of one of the West Coast's most powerful organized crime families, Agent Sarah. Chen joined Harold outside the courthouse as reporters gathered for his final statement about the case. "How does it feel to see justice served?" one reporter asked. Harold looked thoughtful before responding. "Justice isn't about revenge or getting back at people who wronged you. It's about protecting innocent people and making sure criminals face consequences for their actions. These men chose to live by violence and intimidation. Now they'll spend their remaining years learning that choices have consequences." David Peterson had been sentenced to 2 years in federal prison for his role in the conspiracy, but his cooperation had been so valuable that he was eligible for parole in 6 months. Harold had visited David several times during his incarceration, helping the young man plan for his future after prison. "Mr. Martinez taught me that it's never too late to do the right thing," David had told the judge during his sentencing hearing. "I made terrible mistakes, but he showed me that I could still choose to help instead of hurt. When I get out of prison, I want to work with kids who are making the same bad choices I made." Harold's life had changed dramatically since that night at the mall. The FBI had offered him a consulting position that allowed him to work on cold cases and train younger agents in undercover techniques. Harold had accepted the job enthusiastically, discovering that retirement from meaningful work wasn't as satisfying as he had thought. His small apartment had been replaced by a secure house provided by the FBI, complete with modern security systems and privacy from media attention. Harold had initially missed the simplicity of his old life, but he gradually came to appreciate having work that challenged him intellectually and made a real difference in the world. The mall management had offered Harold his old job back, even suggesting they create a security consultant position for him. Harold had politely declined, explaining that his cover was completely blown and his presence would only attract more attention to the shopping center. Instead, he recommended that they hire additional security guards and invest in better alarm systems. Harold's story had inspired people across the country, particularly older Americans who felt forgotten or invisible in modern society. He received hundreds of letters from retirees thanking him for proving that age doesn't have to mean irrelevance. Several law enforcement agencies had started programs recruiting retired officers and agents for part-time consulting work. The most dangerous weapon criminals face isn't guns or handcuffs, Harold had told a group of FBI trainees during a recent lecture. It's experience and wisdom. Young agents have energy and enthusiasm, but older agents have patience and the ability to see patterns that others miss. The combination is unbeatable. Sarah Chen had been promoted to assistant director of the organized crime division, partly due to the success of the Castellano case. She and Harold now worked together regularly on complex investigations that required both technical expertise and old-fashioned detective work. "Harold, I have something I want to discuss with you," Sarah said as they walked away from the courthouse. "We've been asked to consult on a case in Miami involving a drug trafficking organization that's been operating for 20 years. The local FBI office thinks it might require someone with your particular skills." Harold smiled, feeling the familiar excitement that came with a new challenge. "What kind of cover would be required?" "Well, they need someone who can get close to the organization's leadership, someone who appears harmless and invisible, someone who looks like a retired maintenance worker or maybe a hotel janitor." Harold laughed out loud. "Sarah, are you suggesting I go back to mopping floors?" "Only if you're interested. The case could take several months and it would mean relocating to Miami temporarily. But the intelligence we've gathered suggests this organization has connections to international cartels. Taking them down could save thousands of lives." Harold didn't hesitate. "When do we start?" 3 months later, Harold Martinez was working the night shift at a luxury hotel in Miami Beach, pushing a cleaning cart through corridors frequented by some of the most dangerous drug dealers in the Americas. To the criminals who saw him, he was just another invisible old man doing a job that nobody else wanted. But Harold knew better. He was Agent Martinez again, gathering intelligence and building cases that would eventually bring down another criminal empire. The work was dangerous and demanding, but Harold had never felt more alive or more useful. Late at night, as he cleaned the hotel's expensive suites and listened to conversations in languages he had learned during his original FBI career, Harold often thought about that morning 6 months ago, when 3 arrogant criminals had mocked him at the mall. They had seen weakness where there was strength, assumed helplessness where there was experience. Harold had learned during his decades as an agent that the most effective weapon against crime wasn't force or technology. It was the willingness of good people to stand up and fight, regardless of their age or circumstances. Sometimes the most dangerous person in the room was the one nobody noticed. As he worked his way through the hotel's corridors, gathering evidence that would eventually fill courtrooms and send criminals to prison for decades, Harold Martinez smiled. He was no longer the invisible janitor trying to live quietly in retirement. He was exactly where he belonged, fighting the good fight and proving that heroes come in all shapes and sizes. The criminals who had once mocked him were now serving long prison sentences, their arrogance having cost them their freedom. Harold, meanwhile, was preparing to take down his next target, armed with nothing more dangerous than a mop, a bucket, and 78 years of experience in knowing that appearances can be very deceiving indeed. In the end, Harold Martinez had learned that retirement from a life of service wasn't really possible for someone who truly believed in justice. There would always be another case, another criminal organization to infiltrate, another group of young agents to train, and as long as there were bad people doing bad things, there would be a need for good people willing to stop them, regardless of age or the assumptions others might make about harmless old men with cleaning supplies.